This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Welcome back. In this video, I want to get back around to photo assignments, which is something that we started earlier this month, and I haven't done a video in a while, but I want to check in on that, and there's a couple things that I want to talk about with regards to this latest photo assignment. First off, I've had some people ask me when we're going to move on to the next photo assignment. They're getting antsy, they're ready to go, and this is what I want to talk about a little bit, because this assignment is more of a deep dive. This is about discovery, it's about learning, it's about really picking something apart. Before, when I've done photo assignments, I've treated them more like a challenge when we did them, like, let's say last year, and it was kind of like, just go do this week and then we're going to go on to something else. But this one we're really trying to learn something from, and I've actually been working on this photo assignment, and I want to dig in and talk about that. I want to show you some of the work that I've done. Secondly, I want to review where we are on this photo assignment. I think that's really important too, because I haven't actually done a video on this in a couple weeks. But the first part of this assignment, we're dealing with still life tabletop photography. And so I wanted you to find a source of light, in other words, a window, and I'm using this light back here. We're going to get into that in a minute. And you need to know what it's doing throughout the day, assuming the sun's out. And then I guess a secondary thing about this is you learn what it does when it's cloudy and what kind of light that you have then. Sometimes the light is right for what I'm trying to do, sometimes it's not, and I have to shift gears. But that's all part of understanding what we're doing with natural light within the resources and the environment that we're working within, which in my case is this window in my studio. And then for the second part of this assignment, I got into showing you some of the work of Josef Sudek, who I used as one of the examples. And as I got into it, I decided I'd throw a little kink into the assignment. So now that we know what our light's doing, I actually want you to find some Sudek tabletop studies and copy them as close as you absolutely can. If you go look on Twitter or if you go look on Instagram, stuff that I've been tagged in, there's people that have done some really cool work with this. And I want to show you some of the things that I've done, and I want to break this down, talk about it a little bit. But first, I want to talk about why still lifes in Sudek's oeuvre. He had a wide range as a photographer, did a lot of different types of things, known for kind of these half street photography, half landscape type hybrid shots that I think are just absolutely beautiful. You know, as you go through Sudek's work, you realize it's all about lighting and it's all about light. But what's fascinating to me is that we have these little vignette tabletop setting pieces that are very different in some ways than the rest of the work in terms of scale and scope. And it's a different approach, but you can definitely see he has a style that permeates through everything. And so in thinking upon this and on reflecting on it quite a bit, I'm reminded of a musical comparison that I want to make with these. So there is a style of music composition that was very popular in the 19th century with composers like Franz Liszt, Friedrich Chopin, called the etude. And an etude is typically a piece that is written for a solo instrument, such as the piano, and it's written for some kind of technical challenge for the performer. And I also think that it's kind of a technical challenge for the composer to make something hard for the performer and be able to come up with this in the context of a smaller composition that certainly can influence one's larger works, possibly in a way, but these are just small, focused in little studies. And in many ways, I think that these still life images that Sudek took were etudes to him. They always explore some kind of compositional thought, some kind of little topic, but it's all condensed just within the framework of a still life. So this is actually the point to copying this work. I'm not saying copy it because everything you do from here on is going to look like Josef Sudek. I'm just saying copy it because what we're doing is we're exploring all the little possibilities and all the little details, and we're going to learn from that. And I want to share some of the things that I actually learned from this week, because it just never ceases to surprise me. Even in some of the simplest images in here, there's something to be learned from. So I'm going to dig into some work. I want to show you some examples, but real quick, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor today, who are the awesome folks over at Squarespace.com. Present your photography using Squarespace's modern professional portfolios. The layouts are completely customizable, and you can use Squarespace's drag and drop based backend system, which is really easy to use to present your work the way that you want it seen. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform for building beautiful websites, easily claiming your domain or URL, and creating a custom site that brings your ideas to life. Squarespace is host to a number of other tools, including e-commerce, appointment scheduling, and analytics, so that you can grow your brand and your following. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, you can go to squarespace.com/AOP to save an additional 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Once again, that is squarespace.com/AOP, and I want to thank the folks at Squarespace for sponsoring another episode of The Art of Photography. I've actually been using the book as my point of reference, and I highly recommend this if you can't afford the book or you don't have the book, you can't find the book, at least find images online and consider printing them out, because being able to work from the book and not a computer, I'm not running back to the computer or trying to find a place to put a laptop, and this comes in really handy for reference when you're actually shooting your still life, when you're trying to determine your camera angle, your focal length, and something's just a little bit off and you need to refer back to it. It's really nice. In fact, I think probably the easiest would be to have some kind of just sheet or a printout that you can refer to. But the first image that I wanted to do was this egg in the water, and there's a couple of variants that he did on this. Now, the reason I haven't tackled this yet, and I've seen some other people do it, and I want to make this point, is that it's really difficult to get all of the elements right in the composition, and a lot of that has to do with these were made in the 1950s or so, and certain types of glassware, for instance, this cup with these sides on it, it's really hard to find something that fits that exactly today. In fact, that's a style of glassware that's not particularly popular. You probably could find one. I haven't had a chance to get out and do that yet. But the point I want to make about this is if you're going to substitute something out of the composition, you need to determine what is it that you're going to take away when you replicate this on your own. And this is really important because in the case of the egg, the idea here is using light and refraction. This is a big part of the composition. So you see the way that light comes through a glass, the way it hits water, and the way it reflects and actually breaks up as it comes through these panels. That's very important to the composition because, first of all, why an egg? Well, it's a point of contrast. Everything in this scene is really dark and really flat, including this egg in the front, but these white eggs are used, first of all, as a compositional element. The second thing is that refraction is very key to the composition because it affects how many you see the egg, how it's broken apart. This almost becomes a little bit kind of a cubism kind of thing, or it's definitely an abstract. And so that's a really important element to the composition. So what I would say is if you're going to substitute an element out, and I did some in the work that I've done, just make sure that you're not taking away the whole point of the composition. Really consider what that is that you're substituting. So the first image that I went ahead and took a shot at was this one, which is really hard to see here. I'm going to have to do a cutaway so you can see it better. But essentially, this is a bottle. It's a very low light exposure. You've got a glass behind the bottle, and you barely make out the imaging through the window. And to me, the point of this composition is very minimal light. And so you can identify pieces of this composition, such as the bottle, the glass behind it, a little bit of abstract that's going on outside the window. So basically the whole idea is how little light can you use to discern objects in the image. And so this is what I was going for. I did a quick mock-up of this. I used an empty bottle that I had lying around as well as a glass. And it's really interesting to play with the exposure. I think the most difficult thing about this was getting the focal length and the angle right. And essentially you can do it. I don't have the same scene outside my window, but I did pick the same time of day. I think was really important to getting this right. It has to kind of come through that glass just right. And if I did this when it was really bright, I wouldn't have the same effect. And so I think that's one of the things you want to look for. And that's why the first part of this whole exercise was this whole idea of looking at a window throughout the day and knowing what it's going to do, and then making a judgment call based on what it is that you're trying to get. And in this case, trying to emulate from Sudek and how to get that and what type of light you need. And so for me, this is the very end of the day. And here the sun doesn't drop till about 7:30ish. So that's about what time I was making this exposure. And all these images, by the way, I was doing the last video where I was talking about FTP and I had the borrowed A9. So I had set these to go into the computer automatically. And I just apply a preset on import, which is actually a preset called Still Life that's from my first preset pack. The reason I did that is because at least it gives me something to look at that's not in color. I can go ahead and use that as a reference point. And it's close to what my final will look like, at least close enough to work with. The second image that I chose to work with is this one, which is really interesting, which is a really high contrast, just light study where it's simply coming through a glass. Now this one, I will be honest, I picked it because I thought it would go quick and it looked really easy. As I got into it, this wasn't easy at all. And so basically on the surface, it looks like I just need basically some kind of piece of stemware. I need the light to hit it just right, and I need to cast that shadow. And as I kind of went through and tried different stemware, I noticed that I had a lot of texture coming from the top of my glass. So my first clue was that Sudek actually had his full. And so what I did is, just to simulate this for grins, I took some coffee that was left over from the morning, I watered it down a little bit, poured it into the glass, darkened up my shadow exactly how I wanted it, and allowed the light to play through from the inside. And so that was kind of a really interesting discovery in trying to get that same look. Now the second issue with this, and I thought this was really bizarre and it totally kind of freaked me out,
is I didn't notice it at first glance, but Sudek's glass is actually levitating. And the reason you can see that from the original image compared to the first image that I took is you don't see the base of the stem when it's just sitting on the surface. And so this has to be raised. And so I have a small piece of glass. I actually used, you have to get the height right too. And so it's just maybe a couple inches up off of the surface. And I used 2 GoPros to do that. Of course, this also depends on the height where the sun is in the sky and all that. But anyway, you want to get these as close as you can. And so I was able to emulate that. But then my glass was kind of small. And then there's another thing that I still haven't figured out on here, which is you have this second bulb shape that is on the top of the image. It's just a shadow. And so I started to realize this is possibly 2 light sources. And if that's the case, this may not be done in window light, that this is actually done just using lamps in a living room or something like that. It's probably manufactured electronic light sources and not the sun. And so this is one that's still a work in progress for me. But I wanted to share this with you because these are the types of things you start unlocking as you try to emulate something. And you're like, wait a minute, this doesn't look right. And so you start looking at possibilities. And literally, I realized that shadow was too low. You just lift the glass up, but you're looking at the image, and how does this figure in? Well, it's on some kind of glass table. And so these are things you start to unlock as you go. And another case, just to prove to you guys that sometimes the simple stuff is actually very complex when you start tearing it apart. I absolutely love this very minimal image of this egg. I love the fact that this is a print that's been reproduced in the book. And for whatever reason, Sudek has kind of this piece of translucent vellum or something over the image, and I'm not really sure why. I would imagine this is fairly small in size if you look at it in relationship to his signature, and you can see a lot of the texture in here. But I thought, okay, this is a really simple one. I can get it. So what's going on compositionally? Well, we have an egg that's lit a certain way. This is softer, a little bit more diffuse light, and it is sitting on a wood grain type surface. Now, once again, if you're going to subtract something or you're going to substitute something, make sure that it's not part of the composition. And in this case, it was really hard to do, and I have wood floors in here. There was some options to go with. So what I decided to do was try to leave that grain as tight as I possibly could. You're going to notice that the grain has kind of an elliptical feel to it, and it's almost like rings of Saturn in the way that it kind of balances out with the way the egg is sitting in the composition. Now, another thing that you're going to notice a lot in Sudek's compositions, it has to do with the time that he was photographing, but the influence of modernist style and geometry. And so when you look at things, they're going to be pretty much sitting in predictable planes. So like if you look at the work of Charles Sheeler, and I'm not sidetracking, I'm using this as an example, but Charles Sheeler would do architectural work and everything is just hard 90-degree angles, maybe 45-degree angles, but it's very geometrical, very symmetrical, and you see a lot of that in Sudek's work too. So actually getting the camera angle right on this was a little more difficult when you have to go in on it. Now, the first choice that I made, I decided just to put this egg on the floor and use a different window, and my contrast was way too high. The floor is way too dark, the light was way too high, it wasn't on the right side of the house, plus I have cats that come over and think that they need the egg, so that wasn't working out for me. So I came back to my studio window, put it there, and I actually have a artificial surface that has a wood type pattern, so I cheated a little bit on here, but it did have that elliptical grain type thing in there, and so I was able to get that angle and that contrast of the direction the egg is sitting versus the direction the grain is going. The thing that bothered me though that I just could not get right is the angle on my shadow is just not right. And so it made me wonder if the table he's using in this image is higher up, the sun's a little bit lower in the sky. It's just that whole juxtaposition of the light source and where it's coming from. And once again, this is a really simple image. And you think, oh, I'll be able to, knock that one out in about 5 minutes. No, it takes forever, and I still don't have it quite right yet. And in the end, I would like to print it and put it side by side with this, so I got to find the vellum and all that too. So these are all a little bit of a work in progress for me as we're going as well. This is why I wanted to allow some time on these photo assignments. I think that's really important. We haven't done a deep dive on anything in a long time, and it's just kind of goes against the culture of what we see on YouTube and everything else. But this is really important to allow yourself the time and the flexibility, which we have a lot of right now, to really dig deep and understand and learn something. And so that's what I wanted to make sure we're allowing. I'm going to continue this and be wrapping mine up soon. What we're going to do next, I'll go ahead and tell you, is we're going to take what we've learned in some of these techniques, and we're going to apply this to something that is our own original thing. You can shoot in a different style. You can go for color. You can, make it look more modern. But what I want to do is understand some of these concepts that we're getting from a single photographer and a single approach of just using natural light, just using a still life type scene. But like a lot of these little things like, when I mentioned that glass earlier before that has those panels that go across and cause a refraction. That's a technique that if you've copied that image, then I want you to take that a step further. And how do you use refraction in your own composition that's going to do something? And so that's where we're going to go with this. So if you feel like you have a handle, you can start thinking in that direction. But I would strongly, I've taken 4 or 5 of these, and not even all the ones that I've showed you here, to really dig into these and try to learn. And some of them are complete failure. I just didn't have the materials right. The composition changed, like the glass and the water and the egg. But some of them are really close, and I'm almost there with them. And so this is what we're working with. This is what we're learning. And we're learning about balance. We're learning about composition. We're learning about what can be done. And we're letting somebody who was a past master of the highest order, I think, because I'm a huge Sudek fan, teach us that. So anyway, if you have any questions, please drop them below. I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, later.